So reset there. Hi there.
Yep.
You're listening to Unnatural Selection.
Again.
Show about easy time stuff and things. George is angry at insiders and the government, and we're talking about the Queensland floods. Go ahead.
The Queensland floods. So this week, the main thing that's I guess happened in the news is that the despair has turned to resentment in a couple of towns because the cleanup is so large that some of the residents feel like they're not getting enough support, which is probably fair.
They're not, frankly, getting enough support. If two guys out in tinnies are the ones rescuing people from their houses as they're going under, I would say that the government response has been somewhat lackluster, to put it.
But also,
just like nicely.
I mean, you can see that the pictures of the streets where they've obviously the owners of such properties have gone through and removed all the
everything
rubbish now, everything that's busted or waterlogged or whatever. They've dumped it out on the street like it's hard rubbish day, but. If those piles are just sitting there, like no one's coming to clean them up because there's not enough resources involved. So there's been a lot of arguments around defence help, how quickly defence, was able to get in there and actually provide assistance. And one of the things this week, Queensland Premier Annastacia Palaszczuk has been sort of, trading blows in the media with Prime Minister Scott Morrison has been to do with what we call disaster relief funding. So disaster relief funding being funding that the federal Commonwealth can release to the states to help them with whatever they need. So in Queensland's case, that hadn't actually happened and hasn't. In fact, the story has developed this week where Scott was like, yep, we're going to include Queensland in our disaster. We'd already done New South Wales because they're definitely more politically aligned with what with us. So we're going to give the some disaster relief funding to New South Wales. I mean, they may well have asked for it first, who knows? But they then were saying after the fact, we better include Queensland as well. And Palaszczuk has gone, well, hang on. This has been going on for like 2 weeks. We've already given out X amount of millions of dollars to help. Like, it's a bit too little too late, really.
Should have set up a GoFundMe, Annastacia. Like Peter Dutton.
That would have solved the issue. So there's been this back and forth around, well, who's giving the money? When are they giving the money? And now Scott Morrison said, well, I'm not going to, I'm not so stubborn that that I refuse to listen to the Premier when it's when the funding is unnecessary. I mean, you might argue that the funding is necessary. It feels like a weird line to draw for Palaszczuk to be like, we don't need this money. Like, stuff you.
It could, I mean, it could be sort of political statement, right? Like there clearly has been a partisan difference in the way this money has been meted out to different communities, and maybe Palaszczuk's response is partisan in that, like, well, I don't want, like too little too late. What's the point of accepting it? Because it's just going to make you look good. It's past the point where it's going to be useful now.
The direct quote was, the time for that national emergency was probably a week ago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a bunch of state disaster. The state government in Queensland has granted $7.72 million in community recovery grants to flood-impacted residents.
No pun, but that's a drop in the ocean, right? Like, it's $7.72 million isn't going to fucking... That's not even going to hit the sides. Like, that's not going to... communities have been
this way,
completely
the insurance bill is estimated to exceed $1 billion. So, there is a $5 billion, what they're talking about is this $5 billion fund that can be used for disaster relief.
Rainy day fund, you might say. And it's been an extremely rainy day, couple of days. But for some reason, the $5 billion defense fund, $5 billion recovery fund was not deployed for whatever reason. They said, there was red tape and we had to, they had to ask for it and we had to authorize it, and then it was this whole fucking Rube Goldberg machine of like disaster relief funding, as a la the mousetrap or something like that.
It's really weird that and this is, Scott Morrison's gone, well, that's Palaszczuk said, well, we need help with flood mitigation for the future. And then Scott Morrison's gone, well, no, that's a state responsibility. And, and this has been happening since the start of the pandemic, where it's just like, oh, this is a state responsibility, but this one isn't. Look, I have a national cabinet.
Stop being a bunch of pricks and just get in there and help people. Like, I don't understand why this is the discussion. Why this is the discussion, and why Labor's defense spending in 2013 is the discussion. Why any of this is the discussion when, like, people have lost their homes, they've lost their livelihoods, they've lost everything that's important to them, their communities are decimated. And like, I don't know, Scott could have picked up, if he didn't get a call from Annastacia, he could have looked at the news like everyone else and gone, it seems like shit's pretty fucked up in Queensland as well. Maybe I'll give her a call. Just be like, nah, she has to call me.
Like, oh, she didn't write to me, so I guess she didn't ask for it, so I'm not going to do anything about it.
I'll just let a country, a whole state of Australia just sink into the sea. Oh, well, fuck them. They didn't ask for help.
I've had ADF support. This is sort of more to do with funding than it is ADF support. That's been coming in and is increasing as well. So, like, things are underway now, but it seems like, one of Labor's policies is Commonwealth reform or Federation reform. There's not really very specifics about how they're going to do that, but like, that's something that probably needs to happen. I think the pandemic has, and situations like this flood, or the bushfires, before that, it shows that there is red tape where there probably shouldn't be red tape, and that slows down the speed at which you're able to be agile and respond to the crises.
I don't think that it is an excess of red tape which prevented the Morrison government from getting in there and helping. I think it was a lack of motivation. They just, like, genuinely give no fucks about regions that aren't direct supporters of theirs. And
would be. That's the thing. These are all their core constituents. It's like rural New South Wales, rural Queensland. It's Nationals and Liberal heartland, isn't it?
I guess. I mean, certainly the New South Wales more than Queensland. But I just think they don't care. Like, I think Scott Morrison may genuinely be a sociopath. Like, I just don't think he groks, like, human suffering. I don't think he gets it. I don't think he locks into that at all. And you can tell because he's, like, in his khakis and his blue top. He's in his disaster casual. We're hanging out with Bridget McKenzie, doing the tour of the sites, getting some photographs with the ADF, like, doing the handshakes. He's got his volunteer, high vis vest on.
Yeah.
And he's, doing the we're all here volunteering, coming in and doing our bit. Like, he's there for the photo ops, but I don't think he gives a fuck about these people. Like, I genuinely don't think the government gives a fuck whether these people live or die, unless it provides a political advantage to them at the next election.
I think I don't know about, I think they're not operating on the same level as what they probably should be. It's hard to tell. I don't know what happens, internally with who calls who from which department, but I guess it's you're right in the sense that, and this is probably a good way to transition to our next story, is that above all this, so, you've got the war in Ukraine, you've got floods here at home, you've got fuel prices going through the roof and cost of living and all that kind of shit, plus, the economy. While all that's happening, in the back of their mind, and probably not even, this is probably the point, it should be in the back of their mind, but it's probably more at the forefront, they've got an election coming up. And they haven't called it yet.
There's an election coming up?
There's an election coming up. They haven't called it yet. I was talking to my girlfriend about this earlier today, in fact. She's like, when are they going to do it? I'm like, they're just trying to leave it as long as possible so they can get some clear air, so they can dominate the news cycle for a certain period of time, and then they'll announce it. But
they're waiting for.
They just haven't had a chance yet.
They're waiting for a couple of weeks of uninterrupted good news stories, and given the current environment is a never-ending cascading shit show, they're not likely to get it. So they're just, like, waiting as long as possible, being like, surely coronavirus will be over soon. And there's, like, World War III walks around the corner like, hey guys. Hey, didn't see me coming, did ya? Like, it is really one of those things where it's like, I think it is finally, like, it does feel like they're waiting for a break that is just not coming. And like, there's no miracle that's going to swoop in and save them at the last second. Like, Labor's been a pretty small target. They haven't announced anything too ambitious or too radical. Like, it does seem like all the planets are aligning this time round where they really could be properly fucked. But
this is the thing, is that it's interesting because what we're starting, and this is what's happened this week, is we've seen a bunch of announcements which sort of are showing their hand, I guess, as to what their major push for the election's going to be. And that is, when the chips are down, what do you do as a coalition? You go back to national security.
National security.
National security. We're going to keep the nation secure because we're conservatives. None of that hippie shit. We're going to order some subs.
It really does feel like they're just kind of like trying stuff on at this point. They're like, maybe the opposition leaders are Chinese Confederate? No? Nobody? Okay. How about shrewd economic managers? Okay, the budget's blown out several $100 billion since we last looked at it. Okay, maybe not that. Maybe national security. Okay, let's go.
Ticks all the boxes. Fire that cannon up, boys.
Subs, let's fire up the ADF cannon. Let's get the defense spending propaganda mill running. Let's go.
And so a couple of announcements this week, big announcements, was that Scott Morrison did a broadcasted speech from COVID isolation, where he basically, used the war in Ukraine as sort of a starting point and then transitioned to the concept that they're going to, basically install and create an East Coast submarine base. Currently, we only have one submarine base, which is on the west coast in Western Australia.
The good news is, when all of the rivers overflow during the next flooding event, is we'll be able to send some submarines, some of these expensive submarines, through up the rivers in order to be able to rescue some of these endangered Queensland and New South Wales communities. Like, we've got the forward thinking, the forward planning, ordering $100 billion worth of submarines, and we'll just shoot them up the river.
Look, allegedly, this has been, in the works for a number of years now. Since since the previous submarine project, one of the concepts was that they would have another base because it strategically makes more sense to have one on each coast, which is probably does.
How many submarine projects ago was this?
This was probably the 1 or 2 ago when they were doing the ones from France, which the design got stolen and put on the
put on the internet.
But allegedly, this has been under works for a while with these submarines. So that was the first big announcement, was they're going to have, and there were 3 locations. There's one like Brisbane, Port Kembla, I think, and maybe somewhere else in New South Wales as well.
Pretty sure I remember them hanging shit on Kevin Rudd for saying there should be a submarine port at Brisbane, but that's okay. That's fine. Don't worry about it. Keep moving.
And there's been other, sub stories that have come out of that, being like, the locations they've suggested aren't even what's recommended in the report, and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, so I think the concept is that one of those 3 bases or locations will have the base, and that's going to be, a big project. It's the first new naval base that the ADF's created in, a couple of decades.
I can't wait, 30 years for that to be completed. That'll be great.
Exactly, and that's probably the next point. It's like, okay, you're announcing a sub base, but like, there's no detail on the plan. There's no because they don't even know what submarines they're getting yet. Like, to that, like, you know what I mean? Like, they're building a base. We're building some subs. We're building a base, but we don't know. There's no detail.
Adam, you know how you're thinking about it? Don't think about it. Don't worry your sweet, beautiful head about it. Just vote for us and don't worry about it. There'll be submarines at some point somewhere, probably.
And probably off the back of that, the other thing that they announced was a massive increase to the ADF's workforce, bringing it from its current total of, I think it's around 60,000, something like that, up to about 100,000 people by the year, I think it's 2040, which will cost about $38 billion. They're basically increasing the percentage of GDP, I think, up to it's about 2-point-something%, I think, by 2040 is the concept, which, is a pretty massive increase in terms of the percentages. Like, it's like, it's arms race kind of like levels of increase. And it was funny because the way they timed all this, of course, was because there's this war in Ukraine, we're going to have to. It's like, no, you've been planning this for like 2 years.
Some idiot was yelling at me on Twitter today about how, I was talking about this whole story, on Insiders this morning. The Shadow Defense Minister was getting grilled by David Spears about how Labor was worse on defense spending because their spending of percentage of GDP was 1.6%, which is the lowest that it was since, pre-World War II levels, and therefore Labor can't be trusted. They're a bunch of pricks, I guess, was the lesson from that. I mean, despite the fact that in the Howard years it was 1.63% of GDP. But like, I mean, never mind the whole fact that like percentage of GDP as a way of measuring something is kind of inherently flawed because like GDP, gross domestic product, shifts. So what the amount of spending in Australia has remained relatively consistent and actually has increased. If you think about the economy's growing year on year, every year, if you've got the same percentage, say... It's
actually going up.
It's actually going up.
Yeah.
Well, in not just keeping pace with inflation, it's actually surpassing inflation. So defense spending year on year is increasing, and yet fucking, Luke 69420 on Twitter reckons that Labor in 2013 having their GDP ratio on defense spending lower than 2% is like, I don't know, we could have averted the war in Ukraine if Australia only had 2% of GDP on military spend. It's like, it's completely, first of all, military funding, completely unrelated, and also very complicated and not at all linked to this situation in Ukraine where you've got actors that are, it's more to do with NATO and the historical, historical connections of Russian history and society and Putin's like slightly mad fucking,
You mean psychosis.
Psychosis, yes, thank you. That's the word I was reaching for there. Like, none of these things have to do with the other. Like, we're in a world war now, so we have to spend 2% of GDP on... I just don't understand why the military industrial...
becomes a Labor's problem.
Why military industrial complex, like why is it good that we're spending more money? Like, I know reports and white papers out of the military industrial complex have said military industrial complex good, please give military industrial complex more money. But are we ever talking about like what we're getting for that money? Like actual value of that money? Like what we're talking about, the LNP is planning to spend $100 billion or thereabouts on this nuclear submarine program, but is it useful? Will it deliver in time to actually be useful? Like we at no point do we ever seem to discuss the value. It's just like Liberals spend more money on defense, Labor's a bunch of shit cunts, and that seems to be the level of analysis. Like,
it's funny as well because like I'm not sure. I can't remember who the Shadow Defense Minister is. Is it Mark Dreyfus? No, someone else. Anyway, I'm not sure who the Shadow Defense Minister is from Labor, but like I'm not even sure whether they were even in power at the time. Like, was that person an elected member of Parliament during the last?
In 2013, he might have been around, but I don't think he was Defense Minister. Hang on, I'm looking it up.
But anyway, I guess the point being is that it's a
Brendan O'Connor, Shadow Minister for Defence.
It's a pretty weak sort of election pitch that they're throwing out, and it depends. It sucks when insiders and other sort of organisations then try to pick that apart of being like, well, Albanese's already said basically that they'll match any policies that.
Right.
The coalition currently announced. And again,
Labor has turned around to the military industrial complex and says, we'll match it. We can't be beat on price. Come on down. Come on down to ALP headquarters and we'll price match. Like there is no difference between what the ALP is willing to spend on defense and what the LNP is willing to spend on defense. As far as I can tell, right? Like,
not in not in this election cycle anyway. And then
like
Labor know that Labor knows that
fuck what the spending rates were in 2013. It was a fucking decade ago, and the iPhone 6 was the latest technology. Like it was the fucking Obama administration. Like we've had multiple LNP governments since then.
Keep in mind as well that the strategic environment has shifted massively over the last 20 years.
Yes.
So, but the policies that were in place in 2013 were ones that really the Howard government had implemented probably around the time of sort of 9/11 and onwards in response to international terrorism. So there was a pivot.
Right.
And also with the East Timor operation, they realised they needed to modernise and change. So there was a bunch of stuff that was basically coming into effect.
Invite Xi Jinping to talk in like 2014?
Yeah.
Wasn't that like a year after this?
Yeah, and this is the other thing is that, back in 2007 through to probably the end of the Labor era, the strategy was let's engage with China, let's be friends with China, and they were I don't know, they probably still are our largest trading partner. So the strategy was vastly different at that point, which probably made sense because at that point, there was no infinite Xi. We didn't have sort of the claims of I'm not saying ethnic cleansing. What's it called? It's
the Uyghurs.
The Uyghurs and the sort of, the camps and stuff that everyone talks about. Taiwan wasn't as hot property as it is now. The Hong Kong situation had sort of wasn't going on. And they hadn't started occupying islands in the South China Sea either. So all of this...
And it was on the horizon. Like, we understood that China was a rising power and, we wanted to make sure that the policy was one of cooperation as well as containment, trying to straddle that line between,
So turn around 15 years,
but here's this article from
years ago,
2014, where Xi Jinping, I thought I remembered something about this. Xi Jinping spoke to Australia's Parliament at the behest of Tony Abbott in 2014. Okay, so like the world has changed pretty substantially in the intervening 9 years.
Yes.
And Labor in 2013 on the way out should have foreseen.
It's not a fair assessment, but I think
it's so unfair.
I feel like a producer somewhere in the ABC, is just going balance tick. But I guess
as though that's going to save them, right? As though anyone is going to look at the ABC and go, well, they gave a completely unfair interview to Brendan O'Connor, so they're definitely balanced and fair. And no, obviously, like the conservative firebrands are still going to say defund the ABC. They're a bunch of pricks. Like just because you're this balance is bias, balance for show, or maybe it is. Maybe David Spears really just does have a bit of a conservative bent. He's just more conservative.
He did work for Fox News for years.
For Sky News. Yeah, exactly.
I said Fox News, Sky News probably, but same sort of thing.
Same thing.
I actually quite like David Spears. I think he does great interviews.
I think most of the time he does well. You can tell he's done his research and he won't be knocked off a point, right? Like he will stick on a point until he gets some sort of answer out of the politician that he's speaking to. But it seems like he treats the Labor Party like the adults that should be held to account, that they should be and are. And then the Liberal Party, I don't know, it's like, it just seems like they get a bit of a pass.
I don't know about that.
They've set the standards so low for themselves that they don't get the same level of treatment.
This is the thing.
From David Spears. That's what it feels like to me.
It's all... Yeah, maybe so. But like the policies they've announced, and it's really interesting, is that they're all very broad brush policies. So, and look, they've said that the extra funding and the boost to the ADF is going to go into things like missile systems. It's going to go into the subs. It's going to go into the workforce that surrounds the ADF. They're not necessarily going to be just increasing the infantry, for instance, although we are getting the tanks. Don't keep in mind as well, but
I mean, some of it is going into increasing the number of troops, right? Like that is a substantial portion of it, right?
Not necessarily. I don't think they're necessarily increasing the number of like battalions, for instance, that are on the ground, like the amount of infantry challenge. I think it's mostly to do with, from my understanding, the peripheries around the ADF, and again the Navy, the things that probably need spending. To be fair, so yeah, again, if they're purchasing missiles, like how do you launch those missiles? How do you maintain them? If you're having a nuclear submarine project, like how do you maintain that properly? So
despite having no local nuclear industry whatsoever. Yeah, maybe that's something we should look into.
You've got to have, like, maintaining submarines is, it's huge. And the other thing is, like, a lot of these, Jackie Lambie's kind of made this point that there are probably people that service the ADF at the moment that these jobs are going to replace. But the point being is, over the last 20 years, a lot of these jobs were subcontracted to private defence. But what this policy is going to do is bring them back on the government payroll directly to a point. I'm sure there will be there might be, some logistics battalions and other bits and pieces that increase, but you're not going to have all of a sudden a twofold increase to the amount of infantry that can go and.
But Adam, like, why? Just like why?
Why are we doing it? And
there's so many basically things. There's so many things that we could be spending money on that would have a direct there's so many like. Pick an existential crisis, any existential crisis. Like, we have enough of them to choose from where, you've got coronavirus pandemic, you've got the resulting, supply chain shortages and difficulties there, financial crisis, you've got, potential World War III situation evolving in Ukraine, and we're building submarines for a naval conflict 20 years from now. It's like, it just seems
it's not just the subs, but it's a part of it. The thing would be,
it's an expensive part of
it. They've timed this announcement particularly well, because again, this has probably been in the pipeline for a year or two. They've timed it to when everyone's afraid and feeling like they need some security, and here we are with a security policy of increasing funding to the ADF and some new sub bases. So
security theatre.
Yeah, it's and this is in line with an election pitch, which is going to be focused around national security, because it's the fallback, which they know that they are always performed well on at election time. That's right. What won Howard the election in 2000 and what was it? I want to say 2004, whatever it was, the one where he, landslide victory after, or maybe it might have been earlier than that, it might have been around 2001, but basically after 9/11, they wiped the floor with Labor, basically just on national security.
But it's so, like, I don't know why there is this predisposition in people's minds to believe that the LNP is worse on...
Because we're fucking stupid,
national
George.
Security. It just seems like this bias. We're like, conservatives, big strong man, conservatives, big strong man, military. And it's like, lefties, lefty weak lefties, lefty vegan, lefty weak lefties. And it's like, that we know for a fact that there is a cigarette's paper of difference between the left and the right in terms of ADF spending, in terms of where they want it to go over the next couple of years. Like, and yet the Liberals still get credit for being better on defense. It's just like, it's just maddening. It's insane. I have no idea where it comes from. Like,
it's just this sort of timing where I think world events have coalesced at the same time as coalition governments, where whether it be the East Timor crisis, whether it be the war on terror, whether it be now where there's a war in Europe, each of those things have coalesced around a coalition government. And so people is probably, it's a dumb notion, but it's something that would stick in minds. I'm sure there are focus groups out there, and they've probably done these focus groups, which is why they are gearing this up as an election pitch around national security. But the thing is, it's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a basic fallback, which they know works for them. And as to why, I think it's just because people are stupid.
I think there's, like, if it was 2003...
It's in the zeitgeist. It's in the zeitgeist now. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. If it was 2003, it'd just be like, they'd be talking about national security and terrorism and, it's like we live in a world of like expansionist, geopolitical conflict, and so that's the boogeyman under the bed that we can talk about. But like, it is just this like go-to. I know it's a go-to, and I know people, like, we have a flaw in our psychology, I guess, that we're vulnerable to that kind of messaging. But like, I don't know, why does it make sense? Why does it work? Make sense. Like, it shouldn't work.
We're afraid, and you look at what's happening, and this is the thing. It's a politics of fear, right? It's there's a lot of real uncertainty in the world at the moment, and the media organisations propagate that, and we feel afraid, and then the government has a policy which says you should feel afraid, but don't worry about it. We're gonna fix it for you, make you feel secure. It's a well-known strategy, and they're capitalizing off our fear. It's a politics of fear. I keep thinking that I watched the movie The Sum of All Fears the other night, and what's his face? Ben Affleck has a nice speech about it. But anyway, so whether this be, Russia, China, if it wasn't Russia, it would be China. Like, there'd be something where we'd be pivoting back to Taiwan again. It's just that in this particular instance, the oxygen has been snuffed out from the Taiwan issue, and we're focusing on Ukraine, which is probably fair enough, because it's a pretty serious situation, which is probably a good way to transition to our next article, which is basically that the US has cut off Russian gas and oil imports.
This is probably a good opportunity to, it's a big deal. I've noticed with this conflict, it does seem like, it's only been going for a couple of weeks, but like, it's just like things that were completely off the table just a few days ago are now on the table, and now they're through, and then like the next thing is on the table. So for example, like the Swift banking system, everyone's saying like, oh, Swift banking system, there's no way they're going to cut that off, and then they did, and then now they're saying, oh, Russian oil, but you can't actually cut off Russian oil, everyone's too dependent on it, there's no way they're going to cut that off, and now they have. And it just makes me feel as though there's this, like, exactly like Noam Chomsky says, like this manufactured consent that the media's building, that we all agree, this drumbeat to war. All these people in the media going, oh, well, let's set up a no-fly zone. The next no-fly zone's a natural next thing. We got to protect the people. We don't have a no-fly zone. And it's like a no-fly zone. If American or NATO jets come into contact with Russian jets, we are talking about a nuclear-armed World War III situation happening. But it seems like everyone in the media seems real happy to just keep, no-fly zone. We got to help the people. There's this consistent like drumbeat pushing, manufacturing consent, just pushing towards war.
Which again is to do with the politics of fear. It's interesting. A friend of mine has been posting some stuff up around sort of, I guess the media hype around the war, and it probably makes it worse to a point, because you get people like Stan Grant, who is a good journalist, but he has I
have feelings about Stan Grant, but go on.
He has a real focus on sort of, what am I trying to say?
Stan Grant.
He has a particular bias, shall we say, in perhaps to his worldview. And look, he's been around, he used to do, reports from Pakistan and stuff. So he's been around the place. But, there are these people that are constantly, whether it be here in Australia or in America, you've got Fox News spurting out various things of fear, and various American politicians also, offering up quotes which various media outlets will pick up and go, we should be doing this. Like, even though you're like some random senator from like North Carolina that no one cares about, all of a sudden he says, oh, maybe we should do a no-fly zone. And everyone goes, oh, maybe we should do a no, you know what I mean? Like, it's an echo chamber of fear.
In America, they call it the blob, right? I think Ben Rhodes was the one who came up with that term. It's this idea for the national security establishment in Washington, right? Like, there's this just blob, and they just have all of these consistent ideas about, it's the same. It really reminds me of the preceding the war in Iraq, right? Where everyone's just kind of, the media's all talking. It's this like sort of feeding frenzy, and it just has this feeling of inevitability about it.
WMDs,
building
WMDs. We just got to keep saying it until you think they're WMDs.
Building the case for war, building consensus with the public about a war when none actually exists, right?
In this case here, though, there is a war, to be fair, but...
Okay, but like it does feel as though that blob, that is sort of established... But they're wrong about everything. They were wrong about Iraq. They were wrong about Afghanistan. Like, these are people who have been consistently, professionally wrong about foreign engagements from the West into, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. Like, they've been consistently wrong for their whole fucking career. Okay, the last 20 years then. And yet, these are still the same people that we're turning to. Fox News. Sean Hannity is saying, we'll just slap some Chinese stickers on the jets and go and bomb the Russian convoy, and then they'll reckon the Chinese did it. And then Donald Trump turns around and agrees with him. Like, this is the dumbest shit. It's like, you guys are playing with the idea of World War III. Like, can you shut the fuck up? You guys have been wrong about everything.
It's, again, watching another movie. I watched a clip from, I think it was Red Dawn, whatever the movie is.
I'm sensing a theme to your movie watching.
Yeah, anyway, it's YouTube. It just feeds, the algorithm just feeds me. Mm-hmm. But anyway, one of the lines is that, they're like, I think it's Swayze, Patrick Swayze is like, why did they attack us? And, the guy he's talking to is like, oh, well, it's two biggest guys in the room. Eventually they're going to fight. But then he also turns around and he goes, well, maybe they just forgot what it's like. And that's it, is that we forget how tragic it can be if it's not, we've got short memories. Anyway, but the point we're getting at here, which was the thrust of this article, was basically gas prices and oil prices are going to go through the roof. How high could it go? Some people have said in Australia, $2.50 a litre. They're saying that right on cue, gas prices, for instance, in gas being petrol in the US, national average of $4.17 a gallon. To get the highest, I think, is $5.37 a gallon, adjusted for inflation. But like, they probably haven't hit their peak yet. So this will affect everyone. It will affect supply chains. It's going to hurt. This is going to hurt.
Yeah.
The global economy, like nothing else. Well, probably since the start of the pandemic, the last major event that happened.
It's so funny though, because to my mind, this does not constitute investing advice, but when I invest in stuff, I look at, the fundamentals of the company, right? It's the real sort of Warren Buffett sort of way about going about investing, is you look at a company, you look at what their, price to earnings ratio is, and you see how much debt they have on hand, you see what the prospects are for the future, you see where they're investing their money, and you go, does this look like a good idea to invest in this company or not? But that's not the way that everyone else invests, obviously, because you're seeing these wild fluctuations on the stock market of these
sell.
Well, people freaking out, and just like, it's funny because America makes up, Russian crude oil only makes up 4% of America's consumption. So for America to shut off is actually not that big of a deal. But you wouldn't know that from the way that all of these stocks are fluctuating up and down. It's like nothing in the fundamentals has really actually changed all that much for everyone yet. And yet, uncertainty about what's happening with petrol and Russia and Ukraine means our petrol prices are now, overnight, $2 a litre, when before they were $1.30 to $1.50. And it's like nothing has changed other than people's perception of what's going on. And yet,
the supply will take a while. That'll take a while. It's going to take
months before anything actually filters through. Yeah, everyone's like pre-anxious about what's going to happen, and that's sent prices skyrocketing, which is crazy because like nothing's different today versus yesterday, right? Like
Europe are going to feel it the hardest because it's to do with the gas, and they're just coming out of winter, but I mean they're still in sort of a winter, spring, sort of early. Is it spring yet? Yeah, it would be spring. Early spring in Europe. So, they're probably going to feel it more than the rest of the world. But yeah, because the barrel of oil price is based on the share market and the going rate, which is subject to fear and anxiety, then that affects everything else. So I mean, it'll probably stabilize to a point, but it's still going to hurt us for the long run. And the thing is, all our supply chains throughout the world, like global supply chains, have just been trying to sort of get themselves back on their feet from the pandemic. If all of a sudden it costs double to transport XYZ good to XYZ location, then your supply chains are getting punched back in the guts again, which at the end of the day affects the consumer. So,
and this is the thing, is the people who are really going to suffer with this situation are the poorest people, right? If you're middle class and you're rich and it costs you $60 to fill up your tank as opposed to $50 or $40 that it did before, you go, that like it affects you not at all. But, you know, if you're on a fixed income, if you're a retiree or you're a pensioner, or you know, if you're on Centrelink, right? If you're getting economic assistance from the government because you're unemployed, you have a finite amount of dollars. And now, if the cost of everything, if the cost of driving, getting, you know, to and from places increases, if the cost of food, it just everything that's on the shelves at the shops, the cost of delivering everything increases. And where do those increases go? They go to the consumer. It's the most regressive kind of tax when you think about it. Because
here's a question for you: like, is it? I mean, given the fact that this conflict is pretty egregious, is that pain worth it? Like, do we have a moral responsibility to suffer a little bit for the benefit of making a global point? A unified global point.
So it depends, right? There was polling around this prior to Russia having their gas sanctioned by the United States, where they asked, these are consumers, regular people in the US, do exactly this question. Do you think that there is a moral imperative to the sacrifice being we would pay more for gas than we otherwise would in order to, you know, show support for Ukraine? And people said yes, right? Overwhelming, it was something like 60+% of people of Americans said yes, we are willing to pay more at the pump in order to... Which is
quite a lot for an American poll, by the way.
Which is a lot, right? And it shows a certain level of solidarity. But that was with the assumption that, you know, as you start putting real numbers to it, obviously that amount goes down. And that amount was predicated on a $4 a gallon price. So it's already $4.17. Is that support going to be there at $5 a gallon? $5.50 a gallon? I would expect...
How long as well?
And for how long?
6 months, 12 months?
Exactly. Yeah, I expect that support would drop pretty precipitously from the public if it starts fucking with people's lives too much. So, to the extent that people are willing to, I think people are willing to pay a little bit more to sacrifice for the benefit of Ukraine. But how much and for how long? That's another question entirely. Like,
keep in mind as well that, like, you know, as a global populace, we've just been sacrificing our living conditions for the pandemic. You know, locking ourselves in our homes, wearing masks, and people got sick of that real quick. So, you know, when it comes to, you know, spending more of my hard-earned cash on something that's really not something that doesn't necessarily affect the American consumer in terms of, like, whether Ukraine's Russian or independent or NATO aligned, whatever. Like, you know, I reckon there's probably it's like months at best before public opinion does a 180 and we just go, who cares about Ukraine? Which is really sad, by the way. Like, that concept just crushes me. But
we have we have strategic reserves of gas and oil, which they're releasing some of, and we have strategic reserves of love and care for other human beings. And we are quickly
literally
we're burning through our reserves right now, and
we've burned through our reserves, right? Like, this pandemic's just our care for fellow humanity and the concept of we're all in this together it's dead.
Yeah.
You know, so how long, you know, and this is also predicated on the concept of how long will this war last. And that's hard to tell. You know, people expected Russia to be done and dusted a couple of weeks ago, and they're still going.
Mate, remember in 2020 when we said, we're going to have to be locked down for up to 8 weeks? And we didn't realize it was up to 8 weeks at a time, several times a year. You know, like, I think this conflict is nowhere near over, and I think this is going to be dragging on for months, if not years. I really do see this as being an ongoing situation, and there's peace talks and all this sort of shit, but they're bombing humanitarian corridors. I saw the Russians bombed a fucking maternity hospital the other day. It's like, I don't
like. No, that wasn't us.
Yeah, who was it?
Like, the shell crater was 4 meters deep.
Yeah, It was Luxembourg. They accidentally shot a shell off in the wrong direction, and yeah, it's just absurd. But like, yeah, there is should we sacrifice for democracy? Yeah, probably. But like, people are already hurting because of the pandemic, and that's not likely to get better. You've got inflation, you've got prices increasing. Here in Australia, we've got a once-in-a-generation housing crisis where basically our generation is going to be completely locked out of freestanding housing for the foreseeable future until there's some sort of market correction, some sort of crash, things change. Like, the median house price is whatever it is, like $1.1 million or something like that. Like, it's not attainable for most people. And so to have all of those existing pressures, plus the economic recovery, plus the pandemic, and then to say, hey, we need you to dip in a little bit further down into your pocket for the Ukraine that you couldn't probably place on a fucking map if a gun was against your head. You're going to know it's west of Russia. That's about all you know. I wonder how long people will be willing. I think that strategic reserve of patience and goodwill will run thin pretty quick.
Here's another question for you, and this is probably getting a bit off topic, but we can all say that. I think we can all agree Russian tactics are
disgusting. They're the worst.
They're the worst, and they've done it time and time again.
No, we saw the same shit in Syria.
We've done it in Syria, Georgia. Like they've done the same thing. It's the way they conduct their military operations.
Yeah,
using civilians to demoralize. Like it's strategic.
It reminds me of the all-out what they describe in World War II of total war. The all-out war where you are destroying civilians and military personnel alike in order to destroy morale, in order to weaken the resolve of the other side, knowingly committing war crimes, to
bombing cities for the purpose of just destroying morale. Yeah. It's but I guess the question I've got is assuming that Putin can be reasoned with, and I have my doubts about that.
It's a big assumption.
is it worth Zelensky just saying, yeah, okay, we'll be neutral in exchange for an end to the conflict? Like, at what point does it become like incumbent upon the defender to be like, I've got a way out of this? And at the end of the day, like if you're from that area, you know that Russia's security concerns are probably, it's a real thing. Like it'd be the way I heard it, I thought someone said this to me the other day, and I thought, yeah, okay, well, fair enough. It's like, if Mexico suddenly turned hostile to the US and then entered a military alliance with Russia or China, like the US wouldn't stand for that. But the question being is, as the defender, like should Zelensky give in? Say we'll be neutral. What's wrong with being neutral? But there's so many other equations that go into that. Like
you're assuming that would be satisfactory, right? I don't think.
Yeah. And how is that implemented? Like, what does neutral mean? Right. Like, there are so many.
See a situation where Putin acquiesces. I don't see him climbing down from anything. I really don't see him happy until he has captured and occupies Ukraine. So, and that might be like, maybe you could try and chop the baby in half and say, okay, well, you take basically all of East Ukraine and we can just end the war for now for the next couple of years, kick the can down the road another couple of years until you want to take another bite of the apple. But like, I don't see Zelensky backing down. But yeah, at a certain point, when it does become a thing of like, okay, how many of your own people, they say, we'll fight to the last man, we'll fight to the last bullet, all this sort of stuff.
Is that fair? Like,
is that fair on the populace?
Yeah, and especially when a lot of them are ethnically Russian. I mean, a lot of opinion polls see themselves more as European now, like in terms of the zeitgeist. A lot of people, the polling over the last 8 years has transitioned where a lot more people feel European as opposed to Russian.
And that's why you're seeing such like stiff resistance, right? That's why you're seeing this level of
Putin's just making it worse for himself, right? Like he's just exacerbating that feeling. It's actually playing into Zelensky's hands, where he's like, "See, they are aggressive and cunts."
Yeah.
But anyway, so I just it's interesting. It's like there are a couple of ethical quandaries here. It's like, well, yeah, at what point do you go, that's too many lives, and I have to end it for the good of
I don't know that the politics of appeasement work, unfortunately. I think
Putin's too crazy for that, unfortunately. He's not a rational actor.
I really do see him akin to a Hitler-esque figure. It's like the more you give him, the hungrier he gets. And
you can see he's paranoid
because
he's got that fucking table.
Yes. A massive power trip. But if he didn't have nuclear weapons, this would be a completely different conversation. Because I think just about everyone in the world would be saying, invade, get in there, fuck their shit up. But they've got nukes, and you can't really do anything when you've got a nuclear-armed adversary who isn't willing to play by the rules. Like, it does create
it's a situation that works. Yeah, it works in their favor. I don't know whether we talk about. We'll probably I sidetracked the conversation there to give you some ethical questions, but
what do you think? How do you see it resolving? I know neither of us are experts, but like,
I mean, the likelihood is, in my mind, is that it'll continue. It'll be like Syria, where it just gets into this sort of, it stalemates out a little bit. Depends. I mean, the Russians are probably about to launch another offensive, another major one against the capital. If they can't take the capital, and then it'll end up being probably something like it was in Syria, where they've got to fight for each city, and that each battle for each city takes a number of weeks. And at the end of the day, there's nothing left of Ukraine. And, it's just a question really of probably who can outlast each other. And it might end up being where there's like some ceasefire, where it is just this muddle of half-occupied Ukraine. And that sort of continues for the foreseeable future. And, there's the pieces of society are sort of picked up a little bit until the next time, again, Russia wants to take a bite of the apple, or perhaps Ukraine wants to try and retake some of its occupied territory. Unless the Russians can get a win in the next couple of weeks, I think you're going to find that it'll dissolve into a, we're talking like millions of people that may die.
State. It's just going to become fucking Somalia. Like,
it'll become like Syria, where you've got a government centrally located somewhere in a city to somewhere. It might maybe the government will move from Kiev to somewhere in the west of the country. And they'll have that bit of land that's Ukrainian. It's controlled by the Ukrainian armed forces, and there'll be a bit of sort of like an area where it's in flux, and then there'll be a Russian-controlled sector as well. And it'll just become. I just see it becoming like a Syrian conflict a little bit, where it just becomes everyone just gets worn down. Assuming there isn't a decisive win where they can overthrow that government, or the other concept could be that maybe there are some Russian sympathizers or someone that wants to end the war, and they get rid of Zelensky to try and there's a few outcomes that could happen, but I think
I reckon Putin's
at the end of the day,
Putin's bodyguard, if you're listening, just got to get a sneaky bullet in that guy's head. Everyone will forgive you. Everyone will be happy. We need a palace coup, some kind of, I just don't see like you're describing. I just don't see it ending otherwise. Like if Putin is alive.
Zelensky is alive, I think.
I don't see how it stops.
Both of them are within their existing power structures. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the loser is the Ukrainian people
everyone.
Who are just going to
and
the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Are we done? Do we have fuel excise?
I'm done.
Is that you done? Yeah. Let's wrap that bad boy up. I need to go to the toilet. So, yeah.
There was a story about how some backbencher wants SA Premier.
Australian Premier, yeah.
Wants the federal government to get rid of fuel excise before the next budget. But it's March, so we're not doing fucking revisions. We're not cleaving out the fuel excise, which generates millions and millions of dollars a week. No, I don't think so.
Or the election.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't think so. But look, that's some pork barreling I could get behind. You know, it's like an actual gift to the people. It's like, here's something you want.
Assuming that them, you know, what am I trying to say? Fuel retailers then don't just pocket the difference.
Well, they have been known to do that. Yeah, I remember seeing something saying that the average profit margin for a fuel retailer was, prior to the pandemic, was 11%, and now it's something like 19%. So, like, part of this inflation is just gouging. And part of it, I'm sure, has to do with the uncertainty in Ukraine and supply and petrol prices and you know,
the dollars per barrel.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm sure it doesn't help that the Australian government takes 44 cents a litre, puts it in directly in their pocket either. But it's to me, actually, this whole thing is a really good argument for getting onto renewables. Like, why should we be at the behest of insane dictators that are head of petro-klepto states like Russia and Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and others? Why should we all be at their behest when we've got free energy coming out of the fucking sky that we could use if we electrified the grid properly? If we were on renewables and off fossil fuels, this would be much less of an issue.
It would be. Food for thought.
Food that is increasingly expensive to get to you for thought. On that note, we have been, we are, and we always will be Unnatural Selection. Make sure you visit us at our salubrious home on the web, unnaturalshow.com. Make sure you follow us on all the bullshit social medias that have, do, or ever will exist at Unnatural Show. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and motherfucking Vine. I don't know. I think I fucked that up.
You killed it.
Thanks for following me on Twitter and Instagram at George Tsipos.
You can follow me on Instagram at AC Doreen.
And you can follow us all down to the petrol pump, where we'll be just drinking some of those sweet, sweet drops of petroleum while they last.
Be like the thing in Zoolander where they got the petrol fight at the end
Petrified.
Of the start of the movie. Petrol fight! He lights up a cigarette.
Yeah, good times. Thanks for listening, guys. Love your faces. We'll see you next week.